The frost had come early that year, turning the fence rails to glass and the air to smoke. Dawn broke pale and slow across Holt Ranch, where the wind carried no sound but the restless sigh of cattle and the faint creak of a gate too long unlatched. Down that frozen road came a young woman, her shawl threadbare, her boots soaked through, her breath trembling between words she no longer dared to speak. Her name was Mara Wynne, though few in this part of the frontier had ever heard it. The last place she worked, a seamstress shop in town, had turned her away when winter came, saying trade had slowed, that there was no room for pity. She'd walked 3 miles before the horizon opened to a solitary cabin, its chimney breathing smoke like an old man sighing after prayer. A tall figure stepped from the porch, broad-shouldered and steady as the land itself. His name was Rhett Holt. 27 years carved into him the way wind carves stone, hard edges softened only by silence. He watched her for a long while, the way a man studies a storm before deciding whether to run or stand. "You're a long way from warmth, miss," he said at last. His voice carried that plain kind of decency rare among men who live alone. "Warmth ain't always found in fire, sir," she answered, half smiling though her lips were cracked and pale. He didn't smile back, not because he lacked kindness, but because kindness had a cost out here. Still, he opened the barn door and said she could rest there if she had nowhere else. She thanked him, her voice barely above the rustle of straw. He gave her a blanket that smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. When she asked if she could work for her keep, he nodded once, a man of few promises but honest ones. That night, as the wind keened through the valley, Rhett sat by his fire, boots off, coat folded across the chair. From the barn came the soft murmur of humming, "Nearer, my God, to thee," a hymn his mother once sang before the fever took her. He stared into the flames, the sound reaching some forgotten corner of his chest. He could almost see her, his mother at the old piano, the house full of laughter before silence became the loudest thing he owned. Morning came slow. Frost turned the ranch field silver, and smoke lifted in ribbons. Mara emerged from the barn, hair loose, eyes down. She thanked him again, voice rough from cold. He said he had fence lines needing mending, and she offered to cook instead, something simple. He hesitated, but hunger and curiosity made him say yes. The smell of biscuits rose through the air, soft as memory. When he stepped inside, she stood by the stove, sleeves rolled up, her hands trembling just slightly. The place felt different, less hollow, as if the walls themselves had taken a deeper breath. "You don't owe me," he said quietly. She looked up, meeting his eyes with something steady and unreadable. "Maybe I ain't paying a debt. Maybe I'm just trying to remember how to belong." He nodded, unsure why the words struck so deep. That afternoon, a preacher passed by on horseback, calling out from the road. "Mercy's never a guest that stays long unless it's welcomed," he shouted with a grin. Rhett raised his hat. Mara watched from the porch, her fingers tightening around her shawl. After the preacher rode on, she whispered, almost to herself, "He left me with words I can't forget." Rhett stopped mid-step, the frost crunching beneath his boots. "Who did?" Her gaze drifted to the far hills, pale and endless. "A man who said love could outlast shame. He was wrong." The silence that followed felt older than both of them. Somewhere, a horse whinnied. Somewhere, a door hinge moaned. Rhett looked at her, really looked, and saw the hunger that wasn't for food, the weariness that wasn't from walking. That evening, he brought her a bowl of stew, warm and fragrant with herbs she'd never seen him use before. He left it on the porch rail and said only, "Eat while it's hot." When she lifted her eyes, he was already walking back into the house. The wind tugged at her shawl, lifting the edge like a question. She took the bowl, her fingers brushing the spot where his hand had been, and for a fleeting moment, she felt the strange pulse of something returning, something she thought winter had killed for good. Inside, Rhett sat again by the fire, listening for her humming. It came faintly through the walls, trembling but unbroken. He closed his eyes. Outside, the frost thickened across the land, but in that small, unseen space between them, the cold began, just barely, to melt. The snow had not yet melted from the eaves when Mara began mending Rhett's shirts. Each morning, after sweeping the porch and feeding the hens, she sat near the window where the light was softest, stitching along the seams that time and labor had frayed. Her fingers were red from cold, her thread thin but sure. Rhett watched from the doorway once, silent, the scent of boiled coffee curling between them like a half-spoken thought. He had never been a man who needed much, a clean saddle, a steady horse, a roof that didn't leak, but lately he found himself needing sound, the scrape of her chair, the hum she carried in her throat, the rhythm of small, deliberate living. Mara worked quietly, as though afraid to disturb the walls. Yet every corner she touched changed, her folded linens, her mended curtains, her way of placing a loaf on the table as if it were a gift, not a task. Rhett noticed the difference, but said nothing. He wasn't sure what to call the feeling that had begun to stir in him. Gratitude, perhaps, or the ache of remembering what it felt like to share breath with another soul. One evening, while she sewed by lamplight, he said, "You do more fixing than anyone I've known." Without looking up, she answered softly, "Things break easier when no one holds them gentle." The words hung in the air, trembling like the flame. He wanted to ask who hadn't held her gentle, but her eyes warned him that kindness could turn cruel if pried too far. Instead, he cleared his throat and said, "If you need more cloth, I'll ride to town come morning." Her needle paused. "I'd rather you didn't. Folks there talk." He frowned. "Talk don't feed a soul." "No," she murmured, "but it can starve one." The next day, while Rhett was tending cattle, a wagon stopped by the fence. A neighbor woman leaned over, wrapped in a fur collar too fine for these plains. She smiled sharp as a knife. "Didn't know you had company, Mr. Holt," she called. "Pretty thing, though she don't look local." Mara stood at the porch with a pail in her hands, her cheeks burning colder than the wind. Rhett tipped his hat but said nothing. The woman's eyes flicked from Mara's patched dress to Rhett's boots by the step. "Careful who you let in," she said, and drove off, her laughter scattering behind her like gravel. That night, Mara didn't hum. The house felt hollow again, as if the frost had crept back under the door. Rhett found her packing a small satchel, just her shawl, a bit of bread, and her sewing kit. "You planning to leave?" he asked quietly. She nodded, not meeting his gaze. "I've worn out welcomes before, Mr. Holt. Best I go before tongues do worse damage." He stood still a long while. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, carrying a ghostly whistle through the cracks. "If you're leaving because of gossip," he said finally, "then you're giving liars more power than they ever earned." Her lip trembled, but her pride held fast. "It's not gossip I fear. It's kindness I don't know how to live with." He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped aside, letting her pass if she wished. The air between them felt stretched thin, like a thread about to snap. She opened the door, and the cold rushed in, sharp and biting. Then she froze. On the small table beside the door lay a folded blanket, the one she had mended earlier that week. Resting atop it was a note in Rhett's handwriting. "This house stays warmer with you in it." Her breath caught. The paper shook in her hand. She turned slowly to face him, his figure backlit by firelight, rough and tall yet suddenly unsure. "Why'd you write this?" she whispered. He rubbed the back of his neck. "Because it's true. You bring a quiet I forgot was possible." Tears welled in her eyes, unbidden. She pressed the note to her chest as if afraid it might vanish with the wind. "No one's ever said that about me." "Well," Rhett said, voice rough but steady, "maybe they weren't looking right." For the first time, she smiled, not out of joy, but out of recognition, as though a forgotten part of her soul had been called by name. The satchel slipped from her fingers and landed softly on the floor. Outside, the frost was thick again, white breath drifting over the fields. But inside the cabin, something fragile held, something neither of them dared name yet. Later that night, as Rhett banked the fire, he heard her humming once more, the tune faint but alive. He closed his eyes, and the smallest of smiles found its way across his face. By morning, her shawl hung by the door, not in farewell, but in belonging. The day began with sunlight spilling over the plains like a quiet apology for winter's cruelty. The frost was gone now, leaving the earth soft and damp beneath the hooves of Rhett's horses. Mara stood by the fence, apron dusted with flour, her hair pinned up loose the way she liked when no one was watching. The house smelled of biscuits and soap, ordinary things that, in this part of the world, felt close to miracles. Rhett had grown used to her presence, though he still caught himself waiting for the silence she used to carry when she first came. Now, the silence had softened. It sounded almost like peace. Near midday, a small figure stumbled into view along the dirt road. A boy, barefoot, his clothes torn, eyes hollow from hunger. He couldn't have been more than 8. Mara dropped her bowl at once, running to him. "Sweetheart, what happened?" she asked, kneeling in the mud. The boy's lips trembled, but no sound came. Rhett followed, scanning the horizon. There was no wagon, no rider, just emptiness stretching back to town. They brought the child inside, fed him bread and milk. He ate as though he didn't believe the food was real. When Mara tried to wash his hands, he flinched, like a beaten colt. She whispered, "It's all right, you're safe now." Her voice carried a steadiness that stilled even Rhett for a moment. After a while, the boy managed a few words. "Aunt sent me away," he said, eyes down. "Said there ain't no room for me." Rhett's jaw tightened. He'd seen the way some folks treated orphans, like burdens, not blessings. Mara's eyes glistened. She brushed a curl from the boy's forehead. "You can rest here a bit," she said. "Just till we find your people." Rhett wanted to object, to remind her that they barely had enough themselves, but the look she gave him stopped him cold. It wasn't pleading, it was a quiet challenge, the kind that asks a man what sort of heart he plans to live with. That afternoon, the boy followed Rhett outside to the corral, watching the horses with wide, reverent eyes. "Can I help?" he asked. Rhett handed him a small brush. "You can start with the mare. Gentle strokes. She likes to be talked to." The boy grinned shyly and began brushing, murmuring words only the animal could hear. Rhett turned toward the fence, pretending not to notice the warmth that crept up his chest. From the porch, Mara watched them. The sight stirred something she hadn't felt in years, an ache that wasn't pain, exactly, but remembrance. Once, she'd imagined a child of her own, a home where laughter didn't echo against empty walls. Life had stolen that dream, but watching Rhett show the boy how to tie a simple knot, she wondered if some dreams were only waiting for the right season to bloom again. Later, when dusk came and the sky blushed gold, they sat by the hearth together. Rhett, Mara, and the boy, whose name they learned was Toby. The firelight painted their faces in amber. Toby leaned against Mara's arm, half asleep. Rhett sat across from them, elbows on his knees, watching quietly. "You ain't got to save everyone," he said after a long pause, his tone more gentle than warning. Mara smiled faintly, eyes still on the boy. "Maybe I'm not trying to save him," she whispered. "Maybe I just don't want him feeling forgotten." The words hit something deep in Rhett. He knew what it was to be forgotten. By time, by God, by people too busy surviving to remember kindness. For the first time in years, he wanted to speak truth aloud. "Then I reckon you're teaching me something I should have known all along," he said softly. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the smell of rain. Toby stirred and looked between them. "You two married?" he asked sleepily. Mara's cheeks flushed. Rhett chuckled low, shaking his head. "Not yet, son," he said, surprising himself with the word. The child smiled, drifting back into dreams. When Mara carried him to the small cot by the fire, Rhett followed her with his eyes, watching how she moved, careful but sure, like someone learning not to fear her own gentleness. He realized then that the house no longer felt empty, that laughter had crept in through the cracks like sunlight through worn curtains. As the night deepened, the wind chime outside sang, a trembling note that lingered, fragile and beautiful. Rhett turned toward the sound, then toward her, and said quietly, "You've got a way of making silence feel like company." She met his gaze, the fire reflected in her eyes. "And you," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "make loneliness forget its name." For a moment, neither spoke. The fire popped once, then settled. Somewhere beyond the fields, thunder rolled, a reminder that peace never stayed long in a world like theirs. But for that night, in that small cabin, mercy had found its voice, and it spoke not in sermons or vows, but in the sound of a child's breathing between two hearts learning how to hope again. The snow came quietly that night, soft as breath, covering every scar the earth had ever known. The ranch lay wrapped in silence, the kind that presses against windows and hearts alike. Inside, the fire burned low, throwing long shadows that swayed like ghosts across the walls. Mara sat near the hearth, her hands folded tight in her lap. Rhett was by the door, mending a broken bridle, his movements slow, careful. Between them, the room pulsed with things unsaid. Toby slept soundly in the corner, his little chest rising and falling beneath the quilt Mara had sewn from scraps. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the shutters, begging to be let in. Rhett rose to check the latch, but paused when he saw Mara's reflection in the window, her shoulders trembling though no chill had touched her. "You cold?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, sir. Just remembering." He waited. He'd learned that silence sometimes drew truth faster than questions. The fire cracked. "Finally," she whispered, "do you ever feel like life's already decided what you're worth before you even get a say?" He turned toward her, voice low. "I used to. Then I figured the world don't decide much, just tests what you got left after it's done hurting you." Her lips parted as if to speak, then closed again. A tear fell before she could stop it, glinting like glass in the firelight. "There's something you don't know about me," she said softly. "Something that made the world laugh behind my back." Rhett set down the bridle and sat across from her. "If it's shame you're carrying, I reckon I've got enough of my own to keep yours company." She tried to smile, but her face broke instead. "I was promised once. To a man who said he loved me gentle. He courted me under apple trees and told me I was meant to raise a home full of children." Her breath caught. "But when the doctor said I couldn't bear any, he left. Said a woman who can't give life ain't meant to share one." The words hung heavy, filling the room like smoke. Rhett's jaw tensed. He wanted to curse the man, to strike the memory itself, but anger felt useless in the face of such quiet ruin. "And you believed him?" he asked. "I did," she whispered. "For years. I thought maybe that's what God decided for me, to serve others, to stitch clothes for their babies, but never hold one of my own. I tried to make peace with it, but peace don't stay when folks keep reminding you what you're missing." The firelight flickered over her face, tracing every line of pain she'd learned to hide. Rhett leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You think being unable to bear children makes you less of a woman?" Her eyes lifted, startled by the rough tenderness in his tone. "Hell," he said quietly, "some women birth kindness every day, they just do it with their hands, not their bodies." Her breath shuddered out. For a long while, neither spoke. Only the wind filled the silence, moaning through the chimney like an old hymn. "I've never told anyone that," she said. "Not even the preacher." He looked at her then, not the way a man looks at a woman, but the way one soul recognizes another that's still fighting to believe in its worth. "Then I'm honored to be the first." Something in her broke open, not from sorrow, but relief. She wiped her cheeks with trembling fingers. "You make it sound like there's still good left in me." He reached for a log, feeding the fire. "Good never leaves a person, Mara. It just hides till someone makes enough room for it." Outside, the snow deepened, piling against the door, muting the world to stillness. Inside, the air grew warmer, thicker with a fragile scent of healing. Toby stirred once in his sleep, murmuring something about angels, and Mara smiled faintly through her tears. Rhett leaned back, voice almost a whisper. "Maybe God sent you here, 'cause this place was starvin' for gentleness." Her eyes glistened in the fire's glow. "And you?" she asked softly. "What were you starvin' for?" He didn't answer right away. The question lingered between them, tender and dangerous. Finally, he said, "Maybe I was just waitin' on someone who'd see me before fixin' me." The fire popped, sending up a spark that drifted toward the chimney and vanished. For the first time, she didn't look away. Outside, the snow kept falling, listening as two wounded souls learned the shape of grace. Then came a knock at the door, slow, uncertain, like winter itself asking permission to enter. Rhett froze, hand halfway to the latch. Mara's breath caught. "Who'd come through a storm like this?" she whispered. Rhett glanced toward her, his expression unreadable. "We'll find out," he said, reaching for the handle as the wind wailed louder, carrying with it something that sounded like change. The knock came again. 3 soft thuds swallowed by the wind. Rhett unlatched the door, and a swirl of snow rushed in, followed by the preacher, his beard heavy with frost, his breath clouding the air. "Mornin', Holt," he said, stamping his boots. "Didn't think I'd find anyone awake at this hour, let alone in this storm." Mara rose quickly, pulling her shawl tighter. "Reverend Pike, what brings you through this weather?" The preacher looked around, his gaze landing on the small figure stirring near the hearth. "That boy," he said, voice low but firm. "Town's been searching 2 days. His aunt's near beside herself. Says he ran after she whipped him." Toby shrank back into the blanket. Mara stepped between them without thinking. "He's safe here, Reverend. Warm and fed. Whatever his aunt told you, I don't think she's fit to raise him." Pike sighed, rubbing his hands near the fire. "That ain't for me to say, Miss Wynne. Law's the law. Boy's kin has the first claim." Rhett straightened from where he stood, quiet but steady. "Kin don't mean much if it lacks heart." The preacher met his eyes, something like weariness flickering there. "You're a good man, Holt, but you know how folks talk. The town's already whisperin'. A woman stayin' under your roof, a stray child found on your land. You know how fast mercy turns to scandal in these parts." Mara's face paled, though her chin stayed high. "Then let them talk. I've lived under worse." The preacher frowned. "You don't understand. That woman, his aunt, she's comin'. She rode out before dawn. She'll want the boy back." The fire popped hard, throwing sparks across the floor. Rhett stepped closer to Mara. "Then she'll find him behind my door," he said simply. Morning crept slowly, the storm easing into pale silence. When the first rays broke across the snow, a wagon appeared on the ridge, a woman wrapped in a fur cloak, her eyes sharp as cold steel. Toby whimpered when he saw her. Mara drew him near, shielding him with her shawl. The woman dismounted, her boots crunching through the frost. "I've come for the boy," she said flatly. "He's mine by blood." Rhett stood in the doorway, blocking the entrance. "He's scared of you," he said. "That tells me enough." Her glare hardened. "You've no right to meddle in family matters, Mr. Holt. You think taking in every broken soul makes you righteous." He didn't flinch. "No, but it makes the world a little less cruel." The woman's lips curled. "You'll give him up, or I'll bring the sheriff." Before Rhett could speak, Mara stepped forward. Her voice trembled but didn't waver. "You'd drag him back to a place that breaks him? What's law worth if it protects harm?" The woman sneered. "You got no children of your own. You wouldn't understand." For a heartbeat, the words struck like a blade. Mara's throat tightened, but she didn't step back. "You're right," she said softly. "I can't bear children, but I can still love one, and that's more than you've shown." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through the cold. The preacher, who'd been standing behind them, spoke then, his voice low, grave. "Whosoever shelters the least of these," he said, "shelters me." The woman's face faltered. For the first time, doubt flickered in her eyes. Her breath came shallow, her hands trembling. Without another word, she turned, climbed into her wagon, and disappeared down the road, the wheels groaning through snow. When she was gone, Toby burst into tears. Mara knelt beside him, pulling him close. "You're safe, sweetheart," she whispered, her own tears falling into his hair. "You're home." Rhett watched, something breaking open in his chest, a kind of ache too big for words. The preacher rested a hand on Rhett's shoulder. "Seems the Lord's work got done here today," he murmured. "Not by sermon, but by courage." When he left, the air felt lighter, though the snow still clung to the world outside. Mara sat by the fire, Toby sleeping against her lap. Rhett poured water into the kettle, his hands trembling slightly. "You shouldn't have told her that," he said gently. "Told her what?" "That you couldn't bear children." She looked into the flames. I wasn't ashamed anymore. Not after you said what you did. He met her eyes then, and for a moment, everything between them, the distance, the silence, the years of unlived tenderness, folded into one long breath. You have no wife, she said quietly, the words trembling but sure. He set down the kettle, the sound of metal against wood breaking the stillness. From now on, he said, voice rough but certain, I am your home. Outside, the wind slowed. The sun broke through, washing the fields in gold. The ranch looked almost new beneath it, reborn, as if mercy itself had decided to linger. Toby stirred, blinking awake. Can we stay here forever? He mumbled. Rhett smiled, glancing toward Mara. That's the plan, son. The boy smiled and drifted back to sleep. The fire crackled softly. Mara reached for Rhett's hand, her fingers trembling against his calloused palm. You mean that? She whispered. He nodded. Ain't much of a man if I don't keep my word. For the first time, she leaned her head against his shoulder. The warmth between them was quiet, unhurried, and real, the kind that didn't need vows to make itself known. The world outside was still, the snow melting slow under sunlight. It wasn't triumph they'd found, but something humbler, stronger. It wasn't a mansion, or a wedding, or a promise made loud. It was bread on a wooden table, and the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching. And maybe that's how homes are made, one small kindness at a time. Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.